play it any louder, then it's getting shut down.
My name is Waffles, and I'm a government whistleblower turned political commentator, and this is the last 24 hours in the news. Today is November 9th, 2025. It is 5:54 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Here are the top U.S. news highlights for the past 24 hours. U.S. District Court found the president's order to federalize National Guard troops for Portland unlawful and enjoined further use in that factual posture. A major judicial check on domestic military mobilization. The administration has signaled it will appeal. This ruling narrows the executive's domestic deployment playbook and sets a precedent for future litigation over Title X insurrection statutes. SCOTUS removal fight. Copyright Office constitutional test continues. The administration's emergency petition asking the Supreme Court to permit removal of the Register of Copyrights remains active. A decision for the administration which would expand presidential removal authority over independent agency officials and reshape administrative law guardrails. Expect rapid filings and amicus briefs. SNAP litigation, judges order payments, administration appeals, partial payment notices. Courts ordered full November SNAP payments. The administration appealed in some filings and has signaled partial payment approaches and use of contingency funds. Plaintiffs and state AG coalitions are preparing enforcement filings and contempt motions if compliance is delayed. An immediate humanitarian and legal flashpoint. Pentagon Quick Action Guard Program advancing domestic crowd control. Pentagon guidance directing states to stand up quick reaction guard units trained for crowd control is being implemented with units planned nationwide by early 2026. Civil liberties groups, several governors, and veterans organizations warn this institutionalizes a federally coordinated rapid response capacity and heightens the risk of militarized responses to protests. Judicial limits remain an active check. The Portland injunction demonstrates courts are actively constraining deployments in some jurisdictions. Expect more city and state suits and emergency motions aimed at operational ROE and transparency. Who, where, and equipment. Threats and coercive messaging from the administration towards civilians and politicians. Public messaging linking SNAP and other services to the shutdown standoff. Plus, personnel removal threats are being litigated as coercive tactics that impose measurable harms on households and institutions. Watch for additional state AG filings and civil rights complaints. Policy shifts and institutional power risks to well-being. Potential weakening of independence across agencies. The Copyright Office removal test is emblematic of a broader push to expand removal authority and politicize agency leadership, a structural risk to consumer protections, rulemaking stability, and checks on executive power. Centralizing domestic security resources. The Quick Reaction Guard program concentrates rapid domestic capability at the federal level and raises urgent oversight questions. Rules of engagement, detainee treatment, medical and forensic reporting, procurement of less lethal gear, and data transparency. Those gaps create near-term civil liberties and safety risks. Service delivery erosion from shutdown and litigation. The funding standoff plus court filings over SNAP and other programs are producing immediate harms. Food security, school nutrition, hospital reimbursements, and are weakening public service continuity. Food security SNAP disruption equals immediate consumer risk. Court orders and partial payment plans are already pushing more people to food banks and emergency drives. Local food pantry logs and state benefit notices are primary impact sources to monitor. Transport and aviation stress signals. FAA staffing and shutdown pressures have prompted warnings about capacity cuts and potential flight disruptions if the funding lapse continues. A supply chain and travel infrastructure risk to watch. Localized utility and hospital strain persists. No single nationwide outage reported in the last 24, but localized micro outages and hospital capacity strain linger in storm-impacted and resource-stretched areas. This pertains mainly to what happened in Texas, I think last week or the week before. No new national public health emergency reported in the last 24 hours. However, SNAP disruptions and funding uncertainty heighten indirect public health risks. Reduced nutrition, delayed reimbursements for public health responses and constrained surge capacity in some regions, local DPH and hospital bed capacity trackers should be monitored. Measles clusters and localized vaccine preventable outbreaks remain a concern in certain jurisdictions. Nuclear testing directive continues to reverberate globally. The administration's instruction to the Pentagon to resume nuclear testing process after a decades-long moratorium remains ambiguous. Explosive versus subcritical or readiness. Nobody knows what kind of testing they're referring to. Allies and non-proliferation partners demand clarification. Russia and others are already signaling reciprocal reviews. This is a major diplomatic and legal risk. Domestic militarization and rights posture under diplomatic scrutiny. The Portland ruling and the quick reaction program will be noted by foreign governments and rights monitors. U.S. domestic policy choices have immediate diplomatic reputational costs, especially in human rights fora. Portland deployment litigation, major victory for plaintiffs. A judge enjoined the deployment. Administration appealing this docket will be a priority for accountability coverage. SNAP litigation, judges ordered full payments. DOJ, USDA appealed and signaled partial payment approaches in filings. Enforcement and compliance filings and contempt motions are expected. SCOTUS removal petition Copyright Office active. Expect amicus briefs and accelerated briefing schedules. No newly verified allegations of lewd conduct in the past 24 hours that I'm particularly aware of. Under the radar leads to chase. State Adjutant General replies and procurement notices tied to the quick reaction guard memo, equipment lists and ROE drafts, USDA and DOJ compliance affidavits and tariff fund accounting reference in recent SNAP orders, FAA internal letters on staffing and capacity, and any route cut proposals tied to the shutdown, state AG filings coordinating with SNAP plaintiffs, declarations, and subpoenas that often reveal administration timelines. White House and DOD written clarification requests about nuclear testing directive. Which agencies, authorities cited, congressional notifications. Those are things to keep an eye on if you're reporting out here. SNAP litigation, administration emergency appeals plus demand that states undo full payments. So essentially what happened is some states already issued payments to their SNAP recipients using state funds. Donald Trump is demanding that those states reverse their action and take the money back from the people that they gave it from. What happened after a federal judge ordered full SNAP payments, the administration filed emergency appeals up to the Supreme Court and publicly demanded that some states reverse decisions to issue full SNAP benefits. Some states, like Colorado and Massachusetts, are pushing to distribute benefits while the legal fight continues. Why it matters, this has a live humanitarian impact for 42 million Americans. The appeals and administration pressure create legal and operational confusion and potential for counties and food banks to face acute shortages. Records to get if you are reporting on this issue or would like more information: the USDA and DOJ appeal briefs and stay motions, state notices to SNAP vendors, Treasury and tariff fund accounting memos, state benefit loading logs. FAA and DOT warning phased flight cut mandates and short notice capacity. What happened? DOT and FAA warned airlines to plan for phased flight cuts, 4% initially, rising to 6 to 10% and potentially up to 20% if the shutdown persists. Airlines already report rising delays and their scheduling capacity reductions. Transport disruption is cascading infrastructure risk. Holiday travel, cargo flows, medical transports, and supply chain timing are all at risk. Staffing absenteeism, controllers in TSA is the proximate driver. FAA letters, these are records to get if you are reporting on the issue. FAA letters to airlines, internal staffing and absence logs, airport operational contingency plans, airline operational bulletins. National Guard, quick reaction implementation procurement and ROE footprints to watch. What happened? Pentagon memos ordering QRF, quick reaction forces for crowd control, are being implemented. State Adjutant General replies, training schedules, and procurement requests are now being circulated to state DOD offices. Reporting has started, surfacing unit sizes and timelines. This operationalizes federalized domestic crowd control capacity, oversight gaps on rules of engagement, Use of less lethal weapons, detainee handling, and medical and forensic obligations are immediate accountability opportunities. If you are reporting on this issue, records to get would include the original National Guard Bureau memos, State Adjutant General response emails, training curricula, procurement solicitations, and contracts for crowd control gear, batons, shields, OC. Records to get if you are reporting on this issue, the original National Guard Bureau memos, State Adjutant General response emails, training curricula, procurement solicitations, and contracts for crowd control gear, IG, batons, shields, OC rounds, tasers, helmets, after action reporting templates, FAA, ATC staffing distress and federal employee sick outs, operational risk signal, federal employee unions and reporting these notes, rising sick outs and absenteeism among controllers, TSA and federal staff as the shutdown lengthens. Unions warn of stress on safety margins. Why it matters beyond flight cuts, rising absenteeism signals risk for safety critical services. Air traffic separation, security screening, emergency inspections. This is an immediate public safety story. Union briefing, if you want to report on this, union briefings and memos, these are things to get. Agency sick leave rates by facility during the shutdown incident and near miss logs, FAA contingency communications. I just want to comment on this one real quick. I heard that Kash Patel was utilizing private jets to go on a date that he should not have been using. And it really seems to me like all these MAGA people really like the airplane. So if they're going to completely destroy air traffic, and there's going to be a bunch of wrecks, which I'm assuming is what's going to happen when people fly, I hope that their airplane gets it. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm not wishing ill on anybody. I just think it would be more than ironic if something like that were to happen, because they're kind of setting up the circumstances for their own selves to die in a plane crash. Just saying. BIS Commerce Regulatory Reversal Footprint Export Control Changes Quiet but Consequential. Commerce's BIS has recently moved to rescind or suspend certain export control expansions, e.g. firearms, export rules, affiliates rule pause, announced. I believe the Trump administration is trafficking weapons to foreign adversaries right now. So that's what that's probably about. I'm just assuming based on my observations. Changes surfaced in policy notices and client memos. Some reversals were quietly posted and may have limited advance notice. The resource for this is the Bureau of Industry and Security. Alright, I got distracted by the whole weapons trafficking thing here. So why this matters, export control changes, alter national security postures, and corporate compliance burdens. Rescissions can create enforcement gaps in private sector trading windows that merit scrutiny. Records to get if you'd like to report on this, Federal Register notices, final withdrawn IFR texts, international commerce, BIS commitment files, DOJ enforcement guidance memos. Other than that, I mean, I'm concerned about weapons trafficking because there was multiple Russians over the course of the past couple years that got caught weapons smuggling. And then we've had very strange nuclear activity. We had the mysterious alien invasion that nobody should perceive as normal at any point in time and never forget about. And then we have this right here. So I'm going to read it. We're looking at the Bureau of Industry and Security, U.S. Department of Commerce website. It's very short. It says, today, the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Industry and Security, BIS, rescinded an interim final rule, firearms IFR, issued by the Biden administration, which imposed onerous export controls on civilian firearms and related ammunition and components. The rescission of the firearms IFR will allow U.S. firearms manufacturers to compete in overseas markets, creating hundreds of millions of dollars per year in export opportunities. We're going to give people a bunch of guns and call it an export opportunity. The now defunct Biden-era firearms IFR imposed a range of excessive and burdensome requirements, including a presumption of denial for civilian firearms exports to 36 supposedly high-risk countries, effectively ceding overseas markets to foreign firearms manufacturers with no benefit to national security. Export license requirements on sporting shotguns and optics to U.S. allies despite no evidence of any national security risk. Bureaucratic hurdles on firearms export licenses such as executive documentation requirements and short validity periods. Today's rule revokes these requirements and restores the export rules for civilian firearms that existed under the first Trump administration. Under these rules, exports of most pistols, rifles, and long barrel shotguns will remain subject to a worldwide export license requirement. Long barrel shotguns and most optics can be exported without a license to U.S. allies and certain partners. License application paperwork requirements for firearms will be streamlined and consistent with normal BIS practice. BIS and interagency partners will continue to screen firearms license applications to reduce the risk of weapons ending up in the hands of wrongdoers. This was written by Jeffrey I. Kessler under Secretary of Commerce for Industry and Security. He stated, okay, this is a quote. BIS strongly rejects the Biden administration's war on the Second Amendment and law-abiding firearms users. With today's rule, BIS is restoring common sense to export controls and doing right by America's proud firearms industry while also continuing to protect national security. That's what it says. That's what's going on there. I'm going to move on. New congressional bill to repeal wiser Medicare automation. Del Bain et al. Healthcare policy fight to follow. House Democrats introduced legislation to repeal the CMS WISER prior authorization model that would outsource certain prior auth functions. The bill was filed and press released in the last 48 hours. This targets an administrative automation model that could materially affect seniors' access to care and create private contractor incentive problems, denials to save money. It is a direct accountability angle on administrative policy and elder welfare. Essentially what they're doing is they're getting rid of the basic criteria to qualify people for disability and they're replacing it with AI. If you would like to report on this issue, items to get would be the bill text, CMS WISER contract terms, CMS Wiser contract terms, vendor proposals, cost-benefit analysis, patient complaint logs in pilot states. This information came from Office of Representative Susan Del Bain press release. I'm going to go ahead and share this information on my Blue Sky. State AG coalition legal activity around SNAP coordinated discovery leverage. Multiple state attorney generals and a coalition of 25 Democratic states have filed or threatened coordination actions and emergency motions demanding the USDA assume liability protections and provide immediate accounting for payments. Courts are issuing deadlines for USDA responses. State filings often include declarations, internal federal emails, and procurement and tariff funding details that expose decision timelines and internal rationales, a rich source of documentary leads. State AG complaints and declarations will be something to watch if you want to keep an eye on this. Subpoenas and served on the USDA, motions, and court-ordered discovery items. Local and state infrastructure signals, select permit and enforcement changes, Ohio and EPA traces, quiet state regulatory postings and permit action pages, Ohio, EPA, and similar show recent permit renewals and enforcement notices that, when aggregated, can indicate local industrial permitting slowdowns or denials, a potential early indicator of manufacturing and investment shifts. These are often missed by national wires. Why it matters: permit denials and enforcement upticks in manufacturing states can foreshadow job loss, plant closures, or shifting investment in local risk to well-being that aggregates into national economic stress. State permit decision logs would be something to keep an eye on if you would like to report on this issue. Other things to watch would be enforcement letters, permit denial justifications, and company responses. The source for this information is the Ohio EPA public notices and state regulatory portals. Kevin Hassett, White House economic advisor, had warned that the U.S. could post a negative GDP growth in quarter 4 if the federal shutdown continues. These are our economic highlights for the day. He cited impacts such as, and here are top economic news highlights for the past 24 hours. Kevin Hassett, White House economic advisor, warned that the U.S. could post a negative GDP growth quarter in quarter 4 if the federal shutdown continues. He cited impacts such as air traffic controller shortages causing travel delays ahead of the peak Thanksgiving period. U.S. and Switzerland trade relations thaw signal. Swiss business leaders' visit may lead to reduction of U.S. tariffs on Swiss goods. Switzerland could gain relief from the 39% tariffs the U.S. currently imposes after a recent business leader trip to Washington. Stock market commentary: U.S. markets hit a speed bump rather than a crash. Weak recent sessions reflect caution about economic data and valuation, not a full downturn. According to investor strategists, the current pullback is a breather, not a crash, though underlying uncertainties, economy valuations are rising. Analysis from The Guardian: the U.S. tariff regime under Trump is eroding the dollar's global safe asset appeal, potentially weakening its dominance and tying economic risk to trade policy. Tariffs reduce U.S. import demand, which in turn can reduce the global role of the dollar with long-term macro implications. Federal Reserve commentary: the Federal Reserve is hunting for strong data signals before moving rates. Third quarter ticked up, but signs of weakening remain. Markets expect another quarter point rate cut in December, but economic uncertainty, including trade and growth, complicates the outlook. The negative GDP risk flagged by Hassett opens a direct accountability angle. How much of the shutdown and staffing shortages, like air traffic controllers, are affecting real growth, travel, services, and hence trade flows? The Switzerland tariff turn is a micro policy shift with trade flow consequences: what goods, their volume, the timeline, and what this means for other countries' trade with the U.S. The dollar's weakening safe asset status, structural trade risks, reduced import demand, weaker dollar equals or is greater to potential export surge for some U.S. sectors, but also inflation and import cost risk. Fed commentary signals how trade policy and growth weakness interplay, while monetary policy, which is a major lever for trade, investment, and consumer demand. From a trade data gap perspective, these are commentary pieces stepping in because of the usual macro data trade flows. Exports and imports are missing or delayed. That in itself is a story about transparency and risk. And here are some private sector proxy indicators and a few meaningful leads tied to U.S. trade and port flows that give insight into current economic trade and stress. While they don't replace full official data releases, they are valuable for follow-up. Ports and container volumes, signs of slowdown. According to analysis by Cushman and Wakefield, U.S. import volumes at major ports remained elevated, but industrial port proximate markets are already showing softness. Imports and port volumes are on the rise, but many port industrial markets are softening. Port proximate industrial vacancy rates are forecast to peak at 8% in early 2026. New construction deliveries remain high in some port-adjacent markets, e.g. Inland Empire, and absorption is weak, suggesting volume remains, but demand pipeline and momentum is cooling. Why this matters: while ports continue handling large volumes, the industrial market dip signals that import inventory, build and consumption demand may be weakening. This is an intermediate indicator of trade plus consumer flow stress. Requests, if you're going to report on this, request linktr.ee throughput for major U.S. ports like LA, Long Beach, Savannah, Houston from port authorities or BTS freight indicators. Overview port logistics managers about current import scheduling, container dwell items, backlog or slack. Check industrial real estate vacancy absorption rate for warehousing near ports for early signs of oversupply. Export control and trade uncertainty survey, CFO shift in focus. A survey reported by Dolet, picked up by the Wall Street Journal, of 200 North American large firms, CFOs, September 3rd through the 17th, shows rising concern about trade, industrial policy, and pricing pressure. With trade uncertainties, a new focus on pricing was the headline. That's from Dolet Insights. Firms are expecting higher input costs due to trade policy tariff risks. Many are reassessing pricing strategy in light of uncertainty over global flows. This private sector forward survey gives real-time insight into how companies are reacting before official trade industrial data are published. It signals that trade policy turbulence is feeding through to cost, price, and potentially demand. If you'd like to report on this, further request full Deloitte, it's Deloitte, Deloitte survey and report for deeper breakdown by sector by tariff exposure. Interview CFOs, trade directors in manufacturing, import-intensive retail, and export-heavy firms, and about how trade and tariff changes are affecting pricing, sourcing, and demand. Cross-match sectors with high tariff or export exposure, e.g. automotive, electronics, agriculture, to track risk. The official trade and economic data pipeline remains thin. Delayed, no new releases in the last 24 hours, but these proxy indicators show trade and inventory as well as industrial demand stress creeping into the economy. For things to watch, these lead metrics can give early warning of broader data drops, exports, imports, and deficit, and reveal where policy and market risk is stacking up. From an accountability lens, the trade policy uncertainty, tariffs, and export controls is generating corporate cost shocks and inventory anomalies, which may pre-translate into job and plant risk, consumer cost pressure, and regional investment pullback. And remember, kids, the stock market is not the economy. Just because the S&P 500 or Dow Jones might be performing does not mean that wages are growing, jobs are secure, inflation is under control, or that people are thriving. And here's the upcoming hazardous weather outlook for the next few days. Northeast, mid-Atlantic. Sunday, high near 44, low 16 degrees. Monday, 47, low 36. Tuesday, high 73, low 36. Sunday is going to be cold. It is going to be cold tonight. Significant overnight cold Sunday to Monday. Freeze risk for unprotected pipes, outdoor equipment, and vegetation. Morning Sunday traffic may be impacted by icy patches, especially on bridges and shaded rural roads. Rapid warm-up Tuesday may lead to melting frost and ice and slick surfaces. Monday morning. It is Sunday, my dudes. Southeast and Gulf Coast, outlook Sunday, cooler than usual. High likely in the 50s to 60s. Overnight low, possibly in the upper 20s to 30s. Inland zones, Monday and Tuesday, gradual warming. Rain chance remains low. Overnight low could dip below freezing. In inland zones Sunday, risk of frost. Coastal estuaries, low-lying areas, possibility of patchy fog in early morning hours, reducing visibility. Outdoor vulnerable populations, elderly and homeless, should be prepared for chilling nights. Midwest and Great Lakes, highs in the 40s, overnight low possibly in the teens, 15 to 20 degrees. Monday, 47, lows, 30 degrees Fahrenheit. Tuesday, warmer, but still overnight lows near or below freezing. Sunday night, severe freeze and frost conditions expected, risk for crops, livestock, and exposed plumbing. Travel risk, roads may be icy early Monday morning. Cold exposed outdoor workers and rural residents need alert for overnight hazard. Plains and central U.S., highs in the 50s, overnight low possibly 20 to 30 degrees. Monday slightly warmer, still cold overnight. Tuesday noticeable warm up, for daytime. Hazard watch, Sunday night freeze risk for open farmland and unprotected equipment. If winds pick up, Sunday and Monday possibility of blowing dust in dry plains, reducing visibility. Farms with late season harvest may face cold and soil freezing risk affecting operations. Southwest and desert southwest, Sunday, warm daytime, overnight low, likely significantly colder than previous nights, 30 to 40 degrees. Monday and Tuesday, mild days, cooler nights. Hazard watch, overnight Sunday, freeze frost risk, especially in higher elevation desert basins. Dry brush, any gusting winds raise elevated fire risk. Monitor for wind increases. Outdoor systems, irrigation pipes may require frost protection overnight. Northwest and Pacific Coast outlook, mostly dry, days mild, nights increasingly colder, especially inland and mountain zones. Sunday, highs 50s to 60s, overnight lows 20s to 30s. Monday and Tuesday, warming trend, but nights stay chill. Hazards to watch, mountain passes, risk of patchy snow and icy travel. Sunday night into Monday, coastal and ridge areas, possible gusty winds. Mountain passes, risk of patchy snow or icy travel. Sunday night into Monday, coastal and ridge areas, possible gusty winds late Sunday. Secure outdoor items. Inland valleys, monitor for frost and freeze early Monday morning. And here are the top international news highlights from the past 24 hours. BBC leadership resigns amid bias accusations. That's not good. The BBC's boss and its head of news stepped down Sunday following accusations of biased coverage, including how a speech by Donald Trump was edited. The White House had previously accused the broadcaster of being a propaganda machine. The BBC is an educational network. Yeah, the BBC is, for anybody who doesn't know, the BBC is the British Broadcasting Corporation. So for me personally, I don't personally feel that our pedo-in-chief should have the ability to determine how foreign countries' media is reporting the news, and I find that incredibly concerning for that reason. Because we've been, from my own perspective, I mean, I'm sitting here reporting the news, so it's like I'm monitoring for international threats being caused by the MAGA movement because of the fact that these motherfuckers be hopping from country to country spreading racism while they build concentration camps and talk about bombing people while starving out people in freaking Palestine and shit. I think the whole world should be concerned about people who are running around doing Nazi salutes, building concentration camps and shit, and throwing people that they detained into the fucking ocean. That's just my opinion by my observations. This raises questions about media independence, state media relations, and how major democracies handle accusations of editorial bias. Implications: Italy, the UK, and other nations may face domestic pressure over journalistic standards. The U.S. may leverage the incident in diplomatic contexts around press freedom. I'm sorry, but the man shits in his pants. Nobody can stand the way he fucking smells. Okay? I'm seeing all this footage of, like, people holding their noses and shit because he smells so bad because he be shitting himself. And he can't even coherently speak. Okay? He just spoke at, like, some sort of football game or something today, where he was literally reading the paper word for word, and it says, I state name, and he read that part while getting booed by a shit ton of people. If he is that mentally incapacitated, there should be no good enough reason for any media outlet to feel required to edit the living fuck out of this demented old psychopath to try and make the bizarre things that he is saying sound somewhat coherent. COP30 climate conference previewed in Brazil. The UN climate summit kicks off in Belém, Brazil, and reports explain what this year's gathering will focus on and why it matters. The summit will shape global climate action, financing commitments, and national policy frameworks with sweeping implications for trade, investment, and mitigation. Watch for announcements on adaptation funding, carbon broader policies, and commitments from major emitters. John Hurley from the U.S. signals pressure on Iranian funding to Hezbollah. The U.S. Treasury's sanctions chief said the current moment provides an opportunity to cut Iran's funding streams to Hezbollah and push for the group's disarmament in Lebanon. Iran is estimated to have funneled $1 billion to the group this year. I don't care what it is. I just don't believe a damn thing that comes out of this fucking administration's mouth. Like, they bombed Iran after warning them that they were going to bomb them, and all of the nuclear materials were moved and no harm was done. This escalates geopolitical sanction pressure strategy in the Middle East with risks of escalation and ripple effects for Lebanon's economy and regional stability. Implications, financial networks, Gulf flows, and Lebanon reconstruction ties are likely to be stressed. Firms linked to sanctionable transfers may face scrutiny. Super typhoon Feng Wang makes landfall in the Philippines. The typhoon hit Luzon with sustained winds of up to 185 kilometers per hour and gusts up to 230 kilometers per hour. About 1 million people were evacuated and at least 2 fatalities were reported. Why this matters: a major humanitarian and infrastructure event with implications for supply chains, regional logistics, and climate risk modeling. Insurance losses may rise. Exporters, importers may face logistic disruptions, and U.S. international relief funding may be activated. State of Michoacan. State of Michoacan, Mexico, rolls out security operation after mayor's assassination. Mexico's federal government launched a large-scale security deployment in Michoacan after the public killing of a local mayor during a cultural event. This shows an intersection of governance, organized crime risk, public safety challenges, and state credibility in Latin America. That is why it matters. Foreign investment sentiment could be affected. U.S.-Mexico cross-border crime and migration policy may see renewed focus. World Bank backs U.S. draft UN resolution for Gaza reconstruction. In a letter to the U.S., World Bank indicated support for a draft UN resolution that would create a 2-year transitional governance body and a major trust fund for Gaza's reconstruction. Why it matters: this sets the stage for large-scale international reconstruction financing, governance reforms, and geopolitical trade-offs in the Middle East. Implications: donor burden, reconstruction contracting, import flows for building materials, and oversight risks all become urgent. Here are 4 additional international developments. Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, cobalt export bottlenecks deepen. What happened? Reports indicate that major cobalt producers in the DRC are still waiting for export quotas and regulatory approvals under a recently introduced mineral export regime. Some shipments remain stuck for weeks at clearance points. The DRC supplies 70% of global cobalt, critical for batteries, EVs, and clean tech. Export bottlenecks can raise a global supply chain risk, raise cobalt prices, and reduce government revenue for the DRC, which affects local governance and regional stability. Implications, if you are interested in reporting on this issue, report on how internal regulations, delays, and export revenue shortfalls are affecting local mining companies, state budgets, and global tech supply chains. Sudan, economic collapse and donor aid warning. New World Bank estimates show Sudan's real GDP contracted 14% in 2024, building on a 29% drop in 2023 amid continuing conflict and institutional collapse. Donor agencies are warning of systemic failure unless aid flows and governance reforms resume immediately. Why it matters: Sudan's collapse threatens humanitarian catastrophe, destabilization in the Horn of Africa, and refugee flows. From an economic development lens, when a major state's economy collapses, trade flows cease, infrastructure decays, and long-term growth is compromised. Real quick, I'm just going to see where Sudan is at on the map. Well, I should probably update my World War III map. I mean, if Russia is behind the global destabilization, that is the lens that I am looking at all of this through. Sudan is right here. Qatar is this little tiny area. This looks like a vital asset. Saudi Arabia is participating. Yemen is being attacked. So then should we be surprised that Sudan is being attacked? Look at where these places are at on a map, and things make a lot more sense. So then I find what is happening in Sudan suspicious, in that there may be potential collusion of Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Russia attempting to overthrow this region for and Qatar for their own purposes. Libya has been destabilized. Syria is wiped out. This is NATO, so if they're trying to close in on NATO, then they would be trying to surround NATO. Turkey has been doing a good job at holding the line. But unfortunately, it does appear that my concerns are, valid, because if we see threats starting to move inland, there's stuff going on in this area. And this is now a hotspot for genocide. And let's see here. I better update my map. Okay, and then here is the other one that I'm reporting on, is the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC. So this is Qatar. The United States is attacking Yemen. Sudan has an active genocide going on right now. And the DRC is also experiencing violence. And there's action in this area as well. This place is destabilized. This place is destabilized. There was violent outbreak out here that I think may have resolved itself. These guys keep telling everybody to fuck off. There's an asshole somewhere in here. These people are really fucking cool. Yeah. Oh, and there was a recent uprising over here probably from another coup attempt recently, like a couple weeks ago. Brazil Amazon region infrastructure blueprint launched. Brazil unveiled a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure and industrial zone plan for the Amazon region, seeking to link logistics, mining, agriculture, and export hubs, expected to accelerate commodity output and regional integration with Asia. This plan could pivot Brazil's export geography, amplify commodity flows to Asia, and carry environmental and governance risk like deforestation and indigenous rights. It has implications for U.S.-Brazil trade, competition, supply chains, and climate policy exposure. For further information, investigate how financing is structured, public versus private, which infrastructure corridors are prioritized, and what roles U.S. and Chinese firms may play. Also, check for local displacement or environmental impact monitoring gaps. The source is from the Brazilian government press release and Reuters coverage. India semiconductor import surge as chip export ban looms. Indian data shows a 12% year-on-year increase in semiconductor imports in October ahead of government-announced export ban on certain chip tech to China and other countries. The import surge seems to reflect stock building ahead of policy change. India is positioning as both a manufacturing hub and a trade actor. Sudden import surges and impending export bans reshape global semiconductor supply chains and trade flows and affect U.S., China, and ASEAN Asian dynamics. For any further information, if you want to report on this, the reporter angle would be which companies are importing, how supply chains are adjusting, and whether U.S.-India policy is aligned, and how local firms are impacted. This concludes my news report for today. I will see you guys later. Everybody stay safe out there.
So the Olympics is great. And Johnny, for the others, the World Cup, Johnny is the head of it. We had our top people, Wasserman. They all came in on the Olympics, and then I saw Johnny. And we got the World Cup, too. And, it's only because they rigged the election that I'll be your president representing you there. I got both of them. I got the Olympics, and I got the World Cup. And I said, it's too bad. One was in 2026, and the other was in 2028. And I said, I won't be there. I won't be your president. But then they rigged the election. and now we won, so I'm going to be your president for the Olympics and for the World Cup. So, Johnny, thank you for the World Cup, and everybody, thank you for the Olympics. We're going to have a great time.
Hey guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment on my videos. And also, don't forget to check out my shop where you could get this awesome Real Patriots Punch Nazis t-shirt. America, fuck yeah! And if you go to the link tree in my bio on most platforms, it's got links to everything, all of my stuff. You can find my shop there. I'm on eBay. You can also get this cool Exterminate MAGA sticker, cause MAGA's fucking cockroaches. And fuck MAGA, abolish MAGA, fuck you MAGA.